At Global Schools Group, we firmly believe that vision is the blueprint for a brighter future. Within 2 decades of its inception, GSG has had a rich legacy of growth. Let's give you a glimpse into our school's visionary path through a short video.
Now, it is a great honor that we stand before you today to welcome an inspirational figure in the world of finance. Please welcome Mr. Piyush Gupta with a huge round of applause. Mr. Piyush Gupta has been the Group Chief Executive Officer and Director at DBS Group since 2009. He is currently the Chairman of the Board of Trustees of Singapore Management University and the Mandai Park Holdings Board. He is also Vice Chairman of the Institute of International Finance, Washington, and Vice Chairman of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development Executive Committee. In addition, he is a member of Singapore's Advisory Council on the ethical use of AI and data. Mr. Gupta is a member of the board of Singapore's National Research Foundation and the Singapore Council for Board Diversity. Mr. Piyush is also a term trustee of the Singapore Indian Development Association.
He has previously been a member of the Singapore Emerging Stronger Task Force, which aims to define Singapore's future in a post-COVID world. The UN Secretary General's Task Force on Digital Financing of the Sustainable Development Goals and the McKinsey Advisory Council. Mr. Piyush was named one of the world's top 100 best performing chief executives in the Harvard Business Review 2019 edition of the CEO 100. He was named the Global Indian of the Year by Economic Times in 2021. Singapore Business Awards Outstanding Chief Executive of the Year in 2016 and Singapore Business Leader of the Year by CNBC in 2014. Mr. Gupta is also the co-chairman of World Life International Advisory Group. Now, we would like to invite Mr. Gupta on stage to deliver his speech. Can we once again have a huge round of applause for him?
So I what can be helpful is I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about 4 things from my life and career journey, which I think might be interesting to you. And then there's a whole bunch of other things I'm happy to talk about as we get to the panel. So the first thing I want to talk about is my background and upbringing. And I think it's important because many of you might resonate with that. I grew up pretty much in Delhi. I grew up in Delhi, and like many people here, I didn't come from the greatest of background or circumstances. My father grew up in a village in Punjab, and he was the first person to get out of the village. Most people in the village studied till class 5 or 6, and that was his expectation. He was the first person in the village. He used to walk 8-10 kilometers to go to school. He's that kind of background. And he finally went and joined the Indian government. And therefore, when we grew up, we were comfortable. But unlike a lot of people who come from second, third generation wealth, we did not come from second, third generation wealth. My father was completely self-made. Somebody recently has been doing a book on why Indians make extraordinarily good CEOs in the US. And one of the things they've cited is that most of these Indians are third generation. So they've come from family background where the parents were already fairly well educated and had means. My father was well educated, self-driven, but didn't have means. So in my growing up, we stayed in the government colony in Delhi, a place called Janakpuri. And like I said, we were comfortable. I never felt poor. But on the other hand, I never felt very rich either. You know, I took the public bus everywhere. I could not afford a three-wheeler I still remember the first time I went and had a coffee in a five-star hotel. It must have been in my 20s. And the idea that I could spend 5 rupees on a cup of coffee was a big deal. The reason I'm going into that is to underline the fact that opportunity and success doesn't necessarily come from a great starting point. It comes fundamentally from what you can make of yourself, the effort and drive that you put in. One of the silver linings for my childhood was that it built this tremendous hunger, which it did for many people like me. I'm not unique. Which comes from the fact that you really have to do something yourself. Your family background is not going to give you a cushion, and so you've got to be self-driven. And that sense of hunger, the sense of strive, the sense of wanting to make a difference, that's informed a lot of my progression in my career. Now, it wasn't that I was anal or a nerd. I had, like most of you, I mean, I had a very eclectic growing up childhood. And I spent more of my time on the football field. I loved playing hockey and badminton. And I did all the usual things kids do. But as I track back, this notion that it was up to you. And you had to look at yourself, your education, your own means to wind up making a difference. I think that's been quite important. The second thing I thought it'd be worth talking about is the education component. I was privileged. The one thing my father was set on was to make sure that I and my sisters got the best education he thought we could get at that time. So I went to school at St. Columbus. It was an Irish Christian Brothers run school. You know, they run many schools, especially in North India. And then I was fortunate enough to get into college at St. Stephen's College in Delhi University. And then I went into IIM Ahmedabad. They are premier institutions in the country. In fact, we have a WhatsApp group we very vainly and proudly call top tier triples because there are about 35, 40 of us who've been able to have those 3 schools in our education curriculum. The interesting thing about the education in schools, though, I look back and say they were fantastic because they really made me what I am. And most of all, high schools, Columbus, I mean, middle school, high school, the schools made me what I am. I've often told people that by and large, 70, 80% of what I was defined by the time I was 16 or 17, by the time I passed out. Now that's a lot, because obviously there's a lot of growing up that happens after that age. But when I look back and reflect on my life, the fundamentals, my strengths, my character, what I'm able to do was formed in high school. And what was that? Because obviously, like all of you, I studied a bunch of stuff. We learned a lot in class. But a lot of that was to do with what I learned outside class. The 2 or 3 things that, Columbus really focused on, apart from sports, were in the extracurricular space. And they gave you an opportunity to dabble with a lot of things. And as things happened, I chose 2, 3 which have really stood the test of time. One was quizzing. I think general knowledge is underrated, but in Columbus, it was a huge thing. Columbus used to keep winning the Bonvita quiz contest every year. And we did that because we used to quiz in class the whole time. And we had inter-class, inter-section quizzing. I found very early that building general awareness, building general knowledge, having a sense of what's happening in the world, the history and the geography, is extremely helpful. Even today, I believe I stand out from a lot of people in forums because I know enough about a lot of things. So general knowledge and quizzing was one. The second big thing I learned in school was debating and public speaking. I was a terrible debater. And like everybody, my first few debates when I was in class 8 or 9, I used to try and memorize my lines, memorize the speech. Is the worst thing you can do, because you forget one line and then you're completely thrown off gear because you don't know what to say next. But I realized also that public speaking comes with practice. The more you practice, the less butterflies you have and the better you get. And therefore, the opportunity to speak to large audiences and speak in public, it came to me through school. By the time I got into college, I was already comfortable with speaking. And that's the second fantastic skill to have. That's the other reason why I think I stand out. I'm quite comfortable talking to anyone, to small groups, large groups, anywhere, because it was a skill I learned in school. And that's been very helpful and very special. The third thing I learned, which I had to relearn, I'll come back to that, was writing. So I ran the editorial board of the school magazines. And just pulling together pieces and learning how to write, I think that's been extremely useful to me as well. Of course, the writing you learned was almost Shakespearean at that time. He wrote a lot of wordy prose. But nevertheless, the willingness to structure your thoughts and write well, that's something that I learned in school too. So you think about these fundamentals, love for general knowledge, the ability to speak and the ability to write well. It's kind of ironic when I look back at my life and say, how important these skills have been. In many ways, they've been a lot more important to me than domain knowledge and subject matter expertise. You obviously learn a few more things. The fourth thing I got in school, we had a society called Leadership Training Service, and I became General Secretary of the society. So that taught me very early lessons in leadership. The society, we had to work with other schools and put together stuff. So how to work cross schools, how to bring people together with different agendas. Again, I honed that skill much later in life, but my early platform to be able to experiment and practice leadership, that came from school as well. College was great. I learned a lot in college, but it was mostly about people. It was mostly about interacting with very different kinds of people. When I got into IIM, I went and joined IIM only because I needed a year to compete for the civil service exam. So I said, better do an MBA instead of just doing a master's. And IIM was the second big learning experience I had, partly because the first time I stayed away from home. So to be able to, and also first time I met very, very different kinds of people. I met people from, Gulbarga and Karnataka, etc. People I never knew, very different kinds of people. So that was helpful. So long story just to say, apart from my upbringing, my education, and particularly my school days, was supremely helpful to me all through my life. The third thing I thought I'd reflect on is my early career days. And so my other big step up in learning came when I joined Citibank. So there's a story in itself. As I told you, I had no intention of joining the private sector. I frankly, because I grew up in this government background and a bureaucratic environment, my whole life was around IAS, IFS. In fact, I wanted to become a diplomat and see the world. I joined IIM only because I said, you do a master's, and if I don't get into the civil services or IFS, what will I do? So better do an MBA as a safety net. While doing that MBA, I first started figuring out what the private sector did. And increasingly started figuring that there were companies in the private sector that allowed you to make impact outside India. You could actually get international. And so I did take the UPSC exam eventually. I didn't make the IFS. I got an IAS offer. But since I was so keen on working outside India, I also got an offer from Citibank. So I said, okay, better become a banker. Now, I call myself an accidental banker. I didn't really have any intention or agenda to go into banking. But I learned very early. In fact, within 6 months, I figured this was the right profession for me. Contrary to popular belief, banking is not mostly about finance. In fact, I tell people not more than 5-10% of people in the bank really do hardcore finance. 90% of people in the bank do general management. And so it's human resources, technology, learning data, consumer marketing, the whole bunch and shebang. And I realized that played well to my strengths because I have good strategic analytical skills. I talked about some of the things earlier, reading, writing, talking to people, working well in teams. And I figured this is a great platform to apply my skills. And I could really make a good career working in the bank. More than the fact that I stumbled into the right career, enjoyed banking, was the fact that I stumbled into the right company. And so to me, that's the third big lesson. Exactly as school, where you go and the nature of education matters, where you start working and the nature of the company matters even more than the domain that you choose to start in. Citibank was very special, it's still very special for me. I worked there 27, 28 years. If you throw a stone anywhere, not just in Asia, Africa, Latin America, large parts of the world, in the banking, in the financial services space, you hit a Citibanker. Citibank built a reputation as being not just city but a university. It just trained, has the best training for everybody in the system. Now, again, when I look back, it's ironic that the training never came in a classroom. You weren't put into a classroom or you were taught. They did that for a few weeks. But mostly the training came from on how they tested you and pushed you on the job. They gave you very early responsibility and they gave you big stretch jobs. And they threw you in the deep end of the pool and they figured you learned to swim. And therefore, ounce for ounce, age for age, you were doing bigger jobs at Citibank than you were doing anywhere else in the system. When I was, 27 years old, they let me run all of North India, including dealing with all of the unions in the country, which are very difficult unions. And I was a 27-year-old kid. When I was 28, 29, I was chief of staff to the entire Indian operation. So technology, strategy, operations, marketing, everything reported to me. And so they really took a chance on me. And that is my third big reflection, therefore, that you need to find something that you enjoy doing, but more importantly, you need to find the right company which allows you to make impact and allows you to grow. Because you can find that kind of company which believes in people and lets people grow, you will learn the most. And so I learned a lot on the job. I often say, that my two biggest learning spells were school and then the early days at Citibank, where I really learned banking effectively. The fourth episode, which I thought might be interesting. So I was doing really well at Citibank. I was, one of the youngest. In fact, I think I was the youngest managing director. I was doing, they called me a high flyer at that time. And so I was 38 years old. I was running the Indonesian business for Citibank, and that was around the time of the first .com boom. So the internet revolution happened. And I was unusual because in my background, I had done some technology in the bank. I had set up e-commerce platforms, so I knew a little bit about how the internet worked. And so I had some people reach out to me and said, do you want to come and try being a CEO of a .com? And late 99, 2000, I said, okay, we'll set up a .com and, who knows, we'll become very rich doing an IPO. So I decided to quit banking for a year. My chairman at that time, I was a prodigy of his, John Reed. He tried to persuade me one evening saying, don't go, you have a great career here. And I kept telling him, this is the new revolution, the internet revolution. If I don't try, I'll regret it all my life. He was a great guy. So next morning he called me before breakfast and said, come for a walk. And we were both in a hotel in Jakarta. And in the walk he said, I think you're doing the right thing, you should go. Because otherwise you will regret it. But I want you to know if it doesn't work out, you come back. We have a job for you whenever you come back. So I had a safety net. So I went, I quit, I set up a .com in Delhi, again, with the Hindustan Times. We created the first online platforms, it is now HT Online. We created a lot of verticals in 7-8 months. In hindsight, 15 years later, a couple of those verticals became unicorns. But I lasted only 7-8 months because the internet, the .com crash happened. And when the .com crash happened, my strategic funders decided not to put money. And since they didn't put in money, I figured this was going to take 10, 15 years. And by then, I was 39, 40. I had 2 kids who were going to school, and I said, there's too much of a risk to take. Now, it was a tough year for me, my toughest year in my life, because 6 to 8 months down the road, you're shutting down the company, you're letting people go, you feel a sense of failure. And in fact, I tell people, my first bout with deep anxiety, maybe depression, came when I was there at the age of 40. I learned to meditate. I took some medication at that time. But most of all, I came back to banking. I told the Citibank had said, come back whenever, so I went back to Citibank. But I went back to Citibank with a really profound learning and a change of attitude. And that learning was this, that while I'd been in Citi the first 15 odd years, I had been driven by personal aspiration and personal ambition. How do I get to the best position? How do I get to be the fastest MD? How do I get the biggest pay package? When I came back with a very different mindset. And that mindset was, I'm going back only because I love banking, I'm a good banker, and I can make impact. And therefore, the last 20, 25 years of my life has really been driven by this idea that if you can make impact, and if you focus on what can you do that really makes a difference to society, to community, to countries, the outcome will follow. For those of you who are from India and those of you who are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, it's very similar to this concept of Nishkam Karma Yoga. So you've got to focus on what you need to do to make impact. Don't worry too much about the fruits, because the fruits are what they are. They will come if you want them. So my whole journey after that was extraordinary. I worked with Citi. I got promoted quickly again. I was running Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Guam, 10, 12 countries through the financial crisis. DBS was, decided they wanted a new CEO. And, one thing led to another, and I've been running DBS now for 15 years. And without going into the details, I believe we've been able to make an impact, not just for our shareholders, we always had a great run, but for customers, for our employees, and most importantly for Singapore. We've been able to put Singapore on the world map as a leading financial center. A lot of it is to do with what DBS did, and I take pride not therefore in my achievements, but what we were able to do in terms of impact. So I thought those four things might be a useful start and a useful segue to get a conversation going. But they relate back to, therefore, hunger and drive, your desire to do something, to a good education, but using the platform broadly and building skills that stand by you, through figuring out how you actually get some domain knowledge and build skills in a particular domain, if you need that. And then finally, about the idea of intent and purpose, that if you can really embrace an idea of intent and purpose, you wind up in the long run really getting a much better outcome. So I'm going to pause there, and I know we have a great panel and we have other Q&A from the audience. I'm happy to take other questions on subjects that interest you and are in your mind through the rest of this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. We are truly privileged to have the opportunity to listen to these words of wisdom today. We would now like to request Mr. Atul Temanikar, co-founder and executive chairman of Global Schools Group, to kindly join Mr. Gupta on stage.
We would now like to begin with an interactive and engaging session with our distinguished guests and panelists from GIIS and OVIS. Over to the panelists.
Are you going to tell me about yourselves first?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. I'm Devakar Sheth from IB Year 1 of the GIIS Smart Campus Singapore. It is such an incredible honor to be present here and speaking with you today. My fellow panelists are Chloe, Shweta, and Dhruv, and we are hoping to learn quite a lot from this interaction. Now, with your permission, we would like to begin the panel discussion. Okay. Sir, my first question to you is, as students, we often wonder how the early phases of a leader's life shapes their success. Could you share with us some key moments from your own formative years that significantly influenced your career path and leadership style?
Okay, I already answered that question. Next.
Good morning. Good morning, sir. I'm Chloe Lee from grade 9A of the One World International School Smart Campus Singapore. And my question for you is, you have said in the past, and I quote, "We have to stop thinking about what other banks would do and start thinking about what big tech will do." This is a very transformative statement, which has brought change to the industry. Now that everything is more tech-based, what do you predict is going to be the next big transformation in the banking industry or the social landscape in the future?
If I knew the answer to that, my name would be Elon Musk or something. So I'm going to maybe answer that question in three ways. One of those ways will try and address your specific question. But the first, this idea that the world is transforming totally because of technology is a very important idea. And there's a guy called Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz on the West Coast who put it well. He said technology or software is eating every industry. And what he meant is that earlier you used to have different industries. Right? Today, because the nature of technology, industry boundaries are disappearing. So I asked people, is Uber a car company or is it a technology company? Right? They are also into the same taxi service, but they use technology to reimagine what is the true job to be done. Is Airbnb a technology company or is it a hotel company? They reimagine the job to be done. The job to be done is to provide accommodation to people. The minute you think that job is to provide accommodation to people, then anybody who can provide accommodation to people is in the hotel business. So when you think in that form, what is the true job to be done? And leveraging technology, how can we attack this differently? You soon realize that your frame of reference has got to change. And that's why I made that statement. I started saying, we're not a bank, we're a technology company offering banking services. Because you have to believe that your competition in the future will come from Amazon, Google, and Alibaba. And not only your competition, your bar on what is the customer experience has to come from there. The same person who goes to Google and uses a clean Google search engine, puts in something and gets an instant response, that's the same person who's going to come to DBS on my website next. They want the same kind of experience. So you got to think about it that way, and that's why that statement. The second prism to me is this, and I meant it. I think it's very hard to make a call on the future. What is really going to, where is the future, what are going to be the social and technological changes. You have to have a point of view, and you can see some big trends, and I'm going to come back to that. But in truth, the pace of change is exponential. And it's so rapid that it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in a year, leave alone what's going to happen in 3, 5, or 10 years. I can tell you, 2 years ago, nobody in the world had thought of LLMs and ChatGPT. Right? It came like this. And despite all the R&D and work we do at DBS, we weren't prepared to say, hey, it's going to become, and we're going to take such a big leap forward in artificial intelligence till OpenAI released ChatGPT. I'm convinced there'll be tons of technologies like this, where we know biogenetic engineering is happening, we know human bodies are being cloned, we know there's revolutions happening, but the human brain is very hard, it's very hard to make sense of all this and make a prediction. So the main thing I urge everybody to do is you have to build a muscle around adaptability and nimbleness. The capacity to be able to respond to change quickly and to be able to leverage change, that's actually a lot more important than predicting the change. And if you can build that muscle to be able to respond, you'll be able to be an early mover every time a change hits you. And so today, you think artificial intelligence and GenAI, DBS, we started on this 8, 10 years ago because one of the mega trends. 3 times we failed because it wasn't ready. But we were ready. And we built a muscle for saying how quickly can we use this if it comes. And not artificial intelligence, but anything comes. Today, we make about $1 billion of incremental income just because we are one of the pioneers in being able to use AI in our business. And that comes because we built the adaptation muscle. The third, your specific question of what might come down the pike, I do think data and artificial intelligence, GenAI, is profound. It will fundamentally change not only the nature of work, it is changing the nature of work, but more importantly, it is going to have very profound social consequence. When you say what is the impact on society, the difference and distinction between us as human beings and machines and robots is getting more and more blurred. And when that happens, the challenges we will face are challenges of philosophy and psychology, not challenges of science. What makes us human beings? What makes us a society? What gives us a different place to an intelligent machine? So these are going to be really important questions. In my world, another big thing that is going to drive and is already driving massive change is DeFi, decentralized finance, or the distributed ledger. Today, a lot of people see it in crypto. So, Bitcoins and so on. And it's obviously, it's a big market by itself. But you have to look past that to realize the underlying nature of the change. It is that the trust mechanism is changing. And what do I mean by that? In the past, all of trust got established through a hub and spoke mechanism. All of you keep your accounts with the bank. I keep a record of how much money you have. All the banks keep the accounts with the central bank. The central bank keeps track of how much money the banks have. All of us go to the registrar of societies who keeps track of who owns which house. Right? So hubs are the controllers of trust and ownership. In a DeFi world, 9 billion people in this world will all deal with each other through smart contracts, distributed platforms, and the trust dynamic no longer relies on hubs. You all trust a network. That has very profound consequence on the way we operate as people and the way societies will evolve. So those are two broad areas where I think there's change coming. Genetics and biogenetics is the third big area. Without a doubt, the nature of an understanding of human health and how we can actually, either through DNA tampering, CRISPR technology, medtech, people will live to 120 years without a doubt. And so that has profound consequence. An aging society where people are living longer and jobs are harder to come by will have some very serious social consequences. So big changes afoot.
Thank you for your receptive answer.
Hello, sir. I'm Shweta Raj from class 11B CBSE of GIIS Smart Campus. Sir, so my question to you is, as the leader of such a large and influential global organization, your role undoubtedly involves making complex decisions that impact not only the company itself, but also a wide range of stakeholders. So what do you believe are the most critical qualities and skills that define a successful leader today, especially in such a fast-changing and competitive business environment?
Yeah. So, let me tell you what I look for in a leader, and I'm going to supplement it. So, everybody's got their own, little way of thinking about leadership. I think of it in 6 I's. Right? The first I is individual accountability. And what individual accountability means is the buck stops with you. So if you want to be a leader, you've got to believe that everything is your problem. Right? Oftentimes when you go into companies or even in school, you figure, I could do this, somebody else didn't do this thing, other person let me down, the infrastructure didn't work. I tell people, if you're going to start up a company, I can tell you everything is your problem. It doesn't matter if the floor, the roof leaked, or the flush wasn't working, or the market wasn't there, or the pricing was wrong. It's all your problem. So individual accountability says you've got to believe everything is a problem, you've got to lean into everything. The second thing I look for in leadership is people who take initiative. So people who are willing to set their own agenda. And again, in companies, it's very easy to come in the morning, turn on your laptop, you'll have 100 messages in your inbox. So you can run your whole life just responding to your inbox. True leaders are people who can create their own outbox, which means every time you go into a situation, you need to spend some time thinking about what can I contribute? What can I do to make a difference? What is my agenda with this thing, right? And so initiative is the second I look for. The third I look for is innovation. It's the stereotype of thinking out of the box, but it's a good way to think. And particularly today, going back to my technology reference, a large part of what we do and how we do it has been built over 40, 50, 60 years because in a pre-technology world. There's a way of doing things which got evolved. But if you go back to first principles and say, why do we need to do things in a particular way? Right? And leverage today's technology tools, you don't need to do things that way. So to question policy, paradigm, ways to do things, even new products, based on the thing of what is the true job we're trying to do and how could you do it differently. So that's the third thing I look for. The fourth thing I look for, the fourth I, is inspiration. And that's got two themes to it. You know, inspiration is really taking people with you, taking your seniors with you, your peers with you, your juniors with you. How do you carry people along? And I think there are two sub-themes to that. One is empathy. The best people who inspire people are if you can think in the other person's shoes. Empathy to me is about that. Can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes? And if you can, then you relate to their problems, their circumstances, their needs, and their desires. And if you can think like them, then you will be able to inspire them because you know what they're looking for. The other part of inspiration to me is communication. I talked about that. It's an underrated skill, but your words matter. And how do you choose to use your words, how you choose to articulate, communicate with people matters. So you inspire people. You know, you could be Adolf Hitler, and you can later in hindsight not be great, but he could inspire millions of people because of the power of his words. So, or you take Narendra Modi, Prime Minister. His oratory matters. You know, the words matter. The fifth I look for is intent. Intent is essentially, I talked about it before. At the end of the day, each one of us has to think about what is my purpose. You know, when I was trying to define the purpose statement for DBS, we brought in a company from Harvard, the Authentic Leadership Institute. And the first exercise they made us do is spend half a day thinking about our purpose. You know, what do we think we are about? What makes us tick? And, you know, I never formally in a structured way tried to think about what my purpose is. And when I did that, I came up with this, you know, one-line thing, which is to help shape tomorrow's world. And then you got to figure how does your purpose match up with the organizational purpose. So I think I look for people who have intent, who have a sense of purpose. And the last I stands for integrity. So finally, you need people who have a sense of integrity in their behavior, integrity in their actions. They can live up to their word, they stand by their word. So when you say what causes good leadership, I like to see a blend and alchemy of all these things. Now, the other thing which I think though is important, and some of this is DNA driven, I do think that the capacity to have the helicopter vision helps. Helicopter vision is you can go up and form a worldview, a strategic view, but you can also get into the weeds. You can come down very quickly and get into details. I think that ability helps create good leaders. And what I said in the beginning, that ability is informed by lateral work and lateral thinking. So if people who can connect the dots, who have the ability to work in horizontals, who have the ability to think laterally and creatively, I think they tend to be good leaders.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful and very well thought answer. I especially love the helicopter view part. And I'm sure all of us students here in our schools, we're also looking at future leadership positions. And even in our future careers, we're looking at leadership positions. So I think this was a very wonderful answer, and we all will benefit from it. Thank you, sir.
Your turn? Or you have to ask another one.
Sir, Anas El Zahabani, a student from Emirates American School in UAE, he also has a question. He would like to ask you, as a leader in the banking sector, what key attributes do you believe schools should focus on fostering in students to help them navigate the complexities of the modern world?
I like the first one. I think I already answered that question. But So, as you know, I also chair SMU, and at SMU at the board and with the senior team, we keep asking the question, what is education for the future? What do you need? And I have to admit, I'm a little bit, I'm a little contrarian. My view is that in the future, other than for researchers, deep domain expertise will be less and less required. It'll be less and less required because you press a button and your device will tell you everything. And that's really important to understand, that the device will always know more than you do. Today, you know, I can go on even the Meta WhatsApp chat and ask about anything. It'll tell me 6 pages of information, which I'll never remember in my head. But as long as I can read, I can understand it, I can synthesize it, in 5 minutes I'll know enough to be able to have a conversation and to see what to look at. So interestingly, I think deep domain will be important for people who are doing basic research. It will be less important for practitioners because you can get the knowledge everywhere. But what will be required, what I said, the capacity to use that knowledge, which means the things I talked about earlier, analytical skills, creative skills, lateral thinking, connecting the dots, having perspective. Even today, the computer doesn't do a good job of that. And so I find the best people are people who can get the information, then they know what to do with it. And therefore, to me, when you think about education, how do you get that lateral capability and the skills I talked about earlier? I think that's a critical part of education that we need to keep stressing. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that you don't need any domain knowledge. Of course, you need to have a general sense of things. So I call it deep generalists. This is what we need to be educating people to be, deep generalists. Deep enough to have... Now, why do you need something? I'll give you a... I thought about this. I'll give you a parable. So when I was growing up, as you know, this was in the days of log tables and slide rules. And we did all our math through mental math, right? So we used to do up to 20 times 20, you knew all your tables and the numbers spoke to you. And in the 80s, the calculator had just come. And my father would tell me, don't use the calculator, right? So, because just use your head, right? So you got to... And after a few years, I told him this is silly. I mean, this is a tool. This can do complex stuff, so why would I not use it, right? Fast forward, we had this big debate. Should we let our students use Gen AI? And to me, it would be stupid not to let students use Gen AI. It's a tool. And if the tool makes you better and wise, of course we should let people use the tool. However, you hold your applause till I finish my however. The however is this, that I believe through my life, numbers speak to me. And so when I see a presentation and somebody puts up a set of numbers, I can tell you without pulling out a calculator or putting out a thing, roughly speaking, is the number sort of right or not? Roughly speaking, what is the ballpark that I should be looking for? And if it's not the ballpark, I can go and refine. And that speaks to me because my mental math is good, right? If you talk to anybody in DBS, they'll tell you, and everybody's scared of coming and doing presentations to me, because on page 84, I'll tell them this is done tally with the formula you showed me on page 23, right? And because there's a fundamental flaw in your thinking, right? So because numbers speak to me, I can pick up this stuff. So that's why I think deep generalists is important. You need to know enough of the domains so you understand the context and you can connect the dots. If you don't know enough, you'll never connect the dots. So if you just go to Gen AI and tell it, Gen AI to produce something for you, it might do it very well. But if you had context and if you had the capacity to connect, you would do a better job of it. I write poetry. I mean, not general poetry, but for people's, but I'm good at rhyming. So I write poetry. And I've compared the poetry that I do with the poetry Gen AI comes up with. I give it the same prompts, it comes up with something. My poetry is always better because I understand the context. And I can weave in context about a person, about a life, about incidents. And Gen AI, despite all the prompts I give it, can't do that. And therefore, deep generalists is the kind of education we need to create.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for that very insightful answer.
Hi, sir. My name is Dhruv Sapra from OS Nanyang. And today I wanted to ask you, as someone who has successfully led major institutions, what do you use to encourage your team to think outside of the box and pursue bold decisions?
Sorry, to make?
To help your team think outside of the box and to pursue bold decisions. And what steps can students who are aspiring to be future leaders take to develop this mindset?
So, again, I'm going to tell you a story. So, in 2013, I wanted to embark on this complete digital transformation. And I was driven to it. Actually, I saw what the Chinese were doing and what Alibaba and WeBank were doing. They were way ahead of anybody in the world. And I talked to Jack Ma one day, and he told me that they were going to bring Alibaba to Southeast Asia. And I panicked. I said, we're dead. So I said, we got to do something different. And the conventional wisdom then was old banks like us, especially one which was state-owned and come from government, could never transform, and we couldn't change. And so the best way to do it was to hire some young kids in torn jeans, put them in a garage, and they would be able to do innovative new stuff. But I was driven by two insights. One, John Reed, my ex-mentor, he tried doing that in the late 90s. He created something called E-City, and he'd hired somebody to do this. And $4-5 billion, and 4-5 years later, it failed. And it failed principally because the core of the company did not buy into it. The core of the company did not own it, and they kept trying to bring it down. But equally, the people we hired didn't understand banking. So they were doing a lot of very cool-looking stuff, flying to California all the time. But what they were doing did not move the needle for the bank. Right? So my one thing since then was you have to attack the core. You have to take everybody with you. But more important, I went home to Delhi. My father in those days was 80-something. And one evening I reflected, my father had done his banking online. He bought my mother something from Flipkart or something online. He'd done a whole bunch of, he'd done his taxes online on the same day. So I reflected, this guy is in his 80s and he's changing the way he lives. And if you can change the way you live in the 80s, what makes us think you can't change the way you live in your 30s, 40s, 50s, etc.? In fact, everybody's changing the way they live in their personal life. You pull out your smartphone, you're buying tickets, you're booking movies, you're eating food, you're ordering all very differently from the way people did it just 10 years ago, right? So we can all change. Then you go reflect, if we can all change, the human mind is the same. So if the human mind can change, then why do we think the human mind can't change in a company? In truth, it can. Then there must be something in the company environment that comes in the way. And so after a lot of thinking with my colleagues, we reasoned that two things you need to solve for if you want to create a culture of change, innovation, and thinking out of the box. The first thing you need to change is adult learning. So, especially as you grow older, you learn by doing. And what happens in most companies is people don't teach you. At home, when my mom was learning WhatsApp and all the stuff, some granddaughter or grandniece would come and show how to do it, and you do it a few times and you learn. But in the office, nobody shows you, and nobody handholds you, and nobody gives you an opportunity to get your hands dirty and do it by learning. So we said we got to solve for that. Adult learning and learning by doing. The second thing we figured you got to solve for is even more important, which is the willingness to take some risk. At home, the downside is very limited. You try it, it doesn't work, you get frustrated. You come to the work environment, you're scared. You'll get scolded, you might lose your job, you lose your bonus, it'll impact your career. So the risk element is very different. So we said we got to solve for this, that it's okay to take risk. It's okay to make mistakes. What makes Silicon Valley great is fundamentally this, that they take pride in failure. A common joke in Silicon Valley is if you do a startup and go looking for funding, if you don't have 4 failures in your CV, you won't get funding. But if you have 4 failures in your CV, every VC will be willing to give you money. In our part of the world, if you have a bankruptcy filed in your name, you'll never get a job and you'll never be given anything. So the consequences of mistakes and error are very high. My thing was we got to change that. And so we worked very hard in creating an environment where it is okay to take risk and okay to fail. We created awards, Dare to Fail awards only to people who failed. We made heroes out of people who'd made a mistake, right? Because the mistake was a logical mistake to make. And we lifted them up. Early in my career, in my DBS stint, somebody made a mistake for a good reason, that used their brains. The regulator asked me to punish them. I told the regulator, not only will I not punish them, I'm going to give them an award. Because they were using the brains and it's okay, it's a small mistake. We lost $1 million. So to create that environment that's okay to make mistakes, you learn from errors, and at the same time, we created the first hackathons in 2014. In my third hackathon, the way we did the hackathons, we'd have about 15 DBS people and 2 startup kids. And the startup kids used to come and work with us. We teach everybody for half a day on Monday morning about some basics about technology. We'll give them a problem to solve, social problem, banking problem, anything. They're given 3.5 days to do experiment, outside in thinking, signposting, storyboarding, to come up with a solution. The kids' job is to code the solution into an app alongside. By Friday, you should have an app that you can showcase saying, this is how my app works. Right? Now, 50% of the people got to the app stage, but it didn't matter. When you're a 45-year-old woman and you can go home and show your daughter, hey, mom created an app at work and this is how it works, a light goes off. So the ability to get your hands dirty is very powerful. We gamified the learning. In COVID, I wanted all our people to learn a little bit about AI and machine learning. So we got, Amazon had this actually, Amazon Web Services. They have a game called Deep Racer. In Deep Racer, they teach you how to program an autonomous driving vehicle. And they teach you how to iterate. So every time you run the vehicle, you iterate, it gets better and better because machine learns. In those days, they couldn't run it on a track. They used to run it only in a virtual thing because of COVID. And so we got them to run this for 3,000 of our people. Everybody, even I learned and I ran it. And my car came, I think, hundredths, which was not too bad out of 3,000. But it became a game. So we won, DBS entered, we were champions in Singapore, we got champions in Southeast Asia, then we became champions of Asia. Today, out of the top 20 deep racers in the world, 5 are DBS employees. Number 1 in the world is a DBS employee because they gamified and learned, and you get people to learn in a different way. So I also have a structured approach to innovation. You know, we spend time, every 6 months, the senior team gets together to your question, what's coming down the pike? What should be? 4 years ago, we launched the first crypto exchange launched by any bank. And that's because we're pretty convinced tokenization is here to stay. And the token economy is here to stay. So we said, let's try and do something we learn. So today it's a very successful digital exchange, right? So some we do top of the house, some we do from the bottom of the house. So we let everybody come up with ideas and we give them some money to do it. That's part of a process as well.
Thank you. Insightful answer.
Since I didn't answer your first question, you get a second chance.
Thank you, sir. So one thing that I really wanted to ask you about is the concept of sustainability, which is taking on humongous importance in society right now. There's a fine balance between meaningful and necessary growth without harming our own natural habitat. How can we balance sustainable living in an age of technology, AI, and Elon Musk?
You know, first of all, I think when you think about sustainability, you've got to think of two sides of which is both environment and society. So the obviously challenges of our planet, and there's a well-known scientists have determined, I think Rockstrom, 9 planetary boundaries. Each of the planetary boundaries is super critical if you're going to continue on this planet. So there's a boundary around aerosol content in the air, there's a boundary around ozone layer, there's a boundary around carbon pollutions and so on. So you've got to stay within those boundaries. But at the same time, the S says that we have to be able to get enough social development for people at the bottom of society. So there is a lady called Kate Raworth out of Oxford. She tried to put this together in a way which I like very much, which she calls donut economics. So you know how a donut is, right? It's got an outside ring and it's got an inside ring, right? And there's a hole in the center. So in her donut economics, all of the planetary boundaries are the outside ring, right? So it says that we cannot get outside the outside ring, because if we start busting the outside ring, the Earth is doomed. But the inner circle represents the social necessities. And the inner circle is hunger, poverty, livelihood, healthcare for people, 9 billion people. So she says if we fall below the inner circle, we are also not doing the best outcomes for our people. So the way she says is we've got to create an economic model that keeps us above the inner ring, but inside the outer ring. And then you get to the sweet spot. That is donut economics. So as we think about sustainability, we've got to be totally immersed with the idea that it's very easy to really think only about the outside ring. But you can do that and drive everything into the inside ring, right? So that's big dilemmas. How do you get the trade-offs right? The one big thing, for example, we said as a bank, we'll stop doing coal financing. I will tell you, it was one of the most difficult decisions for me, because I grew up, my circumstances weren't good. I still have family who grew up in villages or small town India. And I knew, in fact, when I first started working, there was no electricity in India. You needed a diesel generator. And if you didn't have a diesel generator, you couldn't actually even have the lights on, right? So one part of me says that, who am I to deprive the poor person in Semarang or in some small town in India of the right to electricity, the right to power, where they will need it to study, they needed to cook, they needed to make a living, right? And if I say, you know what, I've taken a view that the following sources of power are not good for you, and therefore we won't give them, but I'm playing God. I'm making a determination on the inner ring, right? At the same time, if we don't do something about attacking the outer ring, nobody will. So then we'll extreme. So the dilemma of how much do I lean in? And where do I say, this is important, we can make a difference here, but this is appropriate for the outer ring. It's not an easy choice. So the choice we made is we'll get out of all the coal, because I think coal is really egregious, right? And there are enough alternatives to coal that you can actually take out the really difficult part of the outside ring. But we didn't walk away from oil and gas. And we didn't walk away from oil and gas because I'm convinced gas is a transition fuel. Today, despite all the switch to renewables, solar, wind, etc., 70% of global world park needs are still oil and gas. You take Singapore. You know, we have nothing. We're 700 square kilometers. We've got no solar, we've got no wind, we've got no capacity to create renewable energy. We are completely reliant on gas. So tomorrow we say shut down all gas in Singapore, we won't be able to have this hall. You can't have education, you can't have anything. So you've got to be pragmatic about how do you do that balance and get it right. So I've been leaning in to everywhere where you can bring us below the outer ring. But I've also been very conscious that we cannot compromise the inner ring because it's not practical. You saw what happened in Europe. So a lot of people in Europe are quite fixated on the outer ring problems. And so they were, let's shut down gas, let's shut down everything. And then when Russia-Ukraine happened and they were running out of power and they couldn't handle the cold, they not only went back and rekindled all the gas, they also went back to coal. So because, you have to recognize that there's a social cost to this and you've got to get the balance right.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for that insightful response. It's a really delicate balance, and I'm sure that many of our students will be following that.
And my next question for you, sir, is there a particular person, philosophy, or perhaps an experience that has served as a source of inspiration and motivation throughout your journey? And how did this inspiration shape your approach to leadership and decision-making in your career?
Yeah, I mean, like everybody, I have a lot of people I've looked up to. My father to start with, and a whole bunch of people. But the one person I really call out is Lee Kuan Yew. You go back to what I said, 400 square kilometer island, rock, with nothing, no resources. No minerals, no metals, no agriculture, no energy, no water, nothing. And we're today not just per capita income, but absolute GDP. Unbelievable. We have the highest reserves in the world. We have the richest countries in the world in 50, 60 years. How do you do that? And there are 2, 3 things from Lee Kuan Yew's journey which I take away, which I admire most. One is what I talked about, intent. Intent matters. Every speech of his you see is about Singapore. To me, getting and making Singapore successful, he was just completely driven by that. Right? And so we will make this successful in a particular way. That intent was really, really powerful. And the second big thing that he did, he was the best social engineer that I can think of on this planet. Because everybody, you think about the social engineering he did to create the most, Go Keng Swee did a lot of the economics, right? But I credit Lee Kuan Yew for doing social engineering. You think about the idea of English as a primary language. Not easy to do when people speak the dialects. He drove it. You think about the idea of racial integration, right? Now, and he talked about the detail. So it was his thinking, or he drove the thinking of the fact that you look at most big cities, you find ghettos, right? The Jews will live somewhere, the Muslims will live somewhere, the Hindus will live somewhere, the blacks will live somewhere, so you get ghettos. In Singapore, he said, we won't let ghettos happen. How? By creating a system where in every HDB, every public housing estate, etc., your occupancy must mirror the national averages. So you must have Chinese, Muslims, Indians all living together. But that wasn't the power. The power was one step beyond that. They said, if you do this, then how will you elect minorities to parliament? Because the power of ghettos is that the Jewish ghetto normally elects the Jew, and the Hindu ghetto elects the Hindu. But here, you're spreading everybody around. So they created the group constituency system. then every group constituency, you will have a minority, right? And that gives enough minority representation in parliament. Now, these forms of social engineering, you've got to be really thoughtful to not only do it, but execute against it, right? And the third big thing I credit him for is killing corruption. The big difference between Singapore and all of Southeast Asia and Asia is there's no corruption in the system, by and large. And as a consequence, we look at the difference. In 1960s, we were like everybody else, like Indonesia, Malaysia, everybody in the system. This notion of setting an integrity standard so high and the watermark so high was driven by him and his leadership. So I think these are really special characteristics.
And I want to add to what you said, Piyush. We had a very, very fortunate opportunity to host Mr. Lee Kuan Yew in 2009. And I remember he was so sharp, even at that age of 83. And we really had a pleasure. And it was so good that he was so kind and gracious to have mentioned in his autobiography about the GIS visit. Yeah, so we really have that great fond memory of him.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really interesting.
Sir, Jaden Isles, a student from Dwight School, South Korea, has a question for you. Considering your vast array of professional duties and the high positions you hold, it's evident that you do face considerable pressure from various fronts. So how do you effectively manage these challenges, and what valuable lessons can students learn from your experiences in handling such pressures?
Well, again, let me take two stabs at it. One is at a personal level. So I try to have a lot of balance in my life, and that helps with the pressure. So I'm quite eclectic in my interests, and I create time to do a bunch of different things. So I'm an early riser, but my mornings I'll either work out and do yoga and meditation. I love words, so I'll do Wordle every morning. I'll do connections on the New York Times every morning. I do the cryptic crossword in the car on the way into work. I do social media in the evening and scan. I'll watch Netflix. I play golf on the weekends. I do bird watching on Saturdays. So I just make sure I have a variety of interests, so I'm not all consumed by a particular domain. And that helps because I'm also, I think, a little bit fortunate that I compartmentalize my brain, so I don't carry work in my head. And so most weekends, other than, about half a weekend, I have to focus on, my public duties. But when I'm not doing that, I don't carry work in my head. And so, of course, the downside of that is my wife learned very early that if she told me to do something in office, I'll never remember. And so I told her, you better go tell my secretary because I can't remember it when I'm in office. So, but it's helpful. But the other part of this thing is in a work context. You always have lots of pressures. I've learned an important thing. I make a distinction between what I call the urgent and the important. The urgent is stuff that you have to do because you got to keep the ball rolling, you got to keep ship running, 40 people want things, you got to respond quickly. But the important things are not necessarily always urgent. But the important things need to be done because they require application of mind. And so I've had this habit from very early days that I park my important stuff for the weekend. And I have, a block of time or on the planes where I pull out my important things so I can think about those things. I can read and talk and figure what do I want to do with the important stuff. And by doing that, it allows me to balance and, keep the wheels running, but keep some time out for doing the important things as well.
So I think stress and time management are very important qualities, and I'm sure our students will benefit from.
They can't hear you.
Sir, I'm sure stress management and time management are very important qualities, and I'm sure our students will benefit from all of this because we actually relate to situations like these. So thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, sir. I believe that we've asked all of our questions for now. However, our audience may have some questions, so let's open the forum to them for now.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. My name is Avinash. I'm from IGCSE 10C. What is the importance of the banking sector in the fight against climate change, and what role can students like us play in the fight?
So, the banking sector, I sometimes struggle because let me start. Somebody once asked, there was a robber, the well-known thief, I think Willie something his name was. Somebody asked him, he used to rob banks. So somebody once asked him, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. So that's the part of the banking sector, that's where the money is. And because financial flows go through the banking sector, it's a general belief that if you can control stuff at the money flow, you can control a lot of things. That's probably true in concept, because you do. If you don't make money available, things don't happen. And so if you can control the money pipe, then you can control stuff. Sometimes it gets overstretched. So today my big struggle is we are the global cops against money laundering, wildlife, terrorism, everything, because we're supposed to control the money flow. But in fact, we are bankers. We don't know enough to be CBI, cops, police, investigators, but we have an expectation that you should be able to do it, right? So that's the downside. In climate change, though, that's the biggest opportunity we have. How we allocate capital makes a difference. If we allocate capital to high carbon intensive business models and high carbon intensive industries, they flourish. If we reduce our capital allocation to those kinds of industries and divert our capital to, let's say, the renewable sector or greener or low carbon intensive industries, those tend to do better. So by being thoughtful about our capital allocation, you can shape the infrastructure and you can shape the future economy. And therefore, banks matter. So, how you allocate capital matters. You can also do other things. In addition to capital allocation, we can create products which are suitable. So today we have at DBS, about 20% of our loan book, $70 billion, is in sustainability-linked loans. And so what does it mean? We actually give loans to companies based on their commitment to reduce their carbon footprint or their commitment to be able to hit certain targets on the ESG thing. And those targets could be diversity targets could be carbon emission targets, carbon could be circularity targets. So we create incentive systems that if you hit your target, we will reduce our pricing. And by being a motivator and an incentive provider, we actually help companies do stuff. We also can create product innovation. So H&M, for example, many of you might buy your clothes from there. They were keen on greening their supply chain. So they wanted to go down to the organic cotton farmers. So we created a program with them for cotton farmers. So we now cover 2,000 cotton farmers in North India. And we are greening the supply chain for the cotton farmer so they can provide green cotton to H&M to be able to make more green clothes. So you can actually work at a product level as well. The first and most important thing anyone can do, students or otherwise, is actually not on the supply side, but on the demand side. It takes two hands to clap. So let me give you, today, if you think about the average carbon utilization, carbon intensity of living, the US, an individual citizen consumes about 20 tons of carbon. And in a lot of other societies in the West, it is between 10 and 15 tons. China is 5 to 10 tons. If you get to developing economies, Indonesia is about 2 tons, India is about 2 tons. So when you take a demand, when you take a supply side prism, people will tell you the biggest carbon emission is coming from China, Indonesia, India, etc. But if you take a demand side prism, the biggest carbon consumption is coming from different economies and different countries. And that's because of the lifestyle choices people make. And therefore, the biggest contribution people can make is to impact the demand side. If you can change your way of living, if you can change your own carbon footprint, that's the biggest impact that any individual can make, to my mind. So in DBS here, we've got a site we've created, a Better World site, where we give all our customers the opportunity to buy carbon credits to offset the carbon they're creating. Now, this is a way that you can actually make a difference. You can make a direct contribution to do this. Probably the easiest and most obvious way. The other thing which a lot of people can do, some do at school, mostly after that, is there are a lot of startups which are actually working and finding new solutions for this low carbon intensive, climate intensive activities. We support many of them. We have a big social enterprise program and we support many social enterprise, small enterprise. So there's another thing that you could potentially do.
Hello, sir. My name is Lar and I'm from grade 10. So I understand that you have a keen interest in nature. So my question to you is, how do you manage to strike a balance between the demands of a rapidly evolving digital world with your commitment to a more grounding and nature-oriented lifestyle?
I actually don't see the conflict. So, frankly, I mean, in fact, a lot of the goals, both the E and S goals, sometimes the conflict, even between profit and purpose, I think the conflict is only time frames. If you have a short-term time frame and say, how do I maximize something in 3 months, then yeah, maybe there's a conflict. But if you have a long-term view and say, how do I work for the sustainability of this company or this thing over 5, 10 years, then the conflicts disappear. Why? Because if you want to be around for 10 years, you got to make sure the planet is there for 10 years. You got to make sure that your community is there for 10 years. You got to make sure that you are there for 10 years because you get a license from civil society. So to make sure that all of these things are alive, you get the license of civil society, you got to be relevant to civil society. So one is the time frame issue. If you think long enough, a lot of the conflicts don't really exist. The second to me is technology is actually not the problem. Technology is the answer. A large part of the challenges we have, the answer lies in technology. You take carbon emissions, right? The first is that nobody even knew how to calculate or measure carbon emissions. Nobody knew where the carbon is coming from. Today, with sensor technology, with mapping technology, LiDAR technology, and AI, you can pinpoint what is the carbon emissions and carbon intensity. You can get people to report carbon, and you can find the solutions to be able to create carbon capture technologies, carbon replacement technologies. It's all technology driven. So technology actually has an answer to many of the problems that we've created in the last 200 years in creating this high carbon intensive environment. There is another this thing. So as you know, in the last couple of months, I now chair the Mandai Wildlife Group. So one of the things we're trying to do at Mandai, is go to the zoo, bird park, we're creating more attractions. But this thing around Mandai is not attractions, it is conservation. So to me, if we can create Mandai as an exemplar which inspires people to think about nature and protect nature, then you're really making a difference. You do that because we're obviously a big conservation site at Mandai. So we have veterinaries, and many of the animals we breed are for conservation purposes. But we're limited by space. Right? So if you just do Mandai, it's a 1 square kilometer area. We can do a lot of stuff, we get visitors. But if you really want to make impact and inspire people at scale, you have to go to social media and you have to digitize. So we're now creating digital twins and digital properties to be able to take some of this experience out. So we're creating a whole range of digital properties so we can inspire public at large with some of the core competencies that we possess in Mandai. So to me, technology is a means to an end. You can use it for solutions that we didn't have before.
Thank you, sir, for your insights.
Thank you, sir, for this engaging and insightful session. With this, we have come to the end of the panel discussion. We are grateful to you for sharing your words of wisdom, and I'm sure that everyone present here will be incorporating your advice into their daily lives very soon and will greatly benefit by it. I would now like to hand it over to the MCs.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for those wonderful insights into your journey and for your enlightening advice. Mr. Gupta, may we now request that you please sign the guest book.
Bankruptcy. Good.
I think I just want to add to, before our panelists continue, that under Piyush's leadership, I think some of you or many of you would know that DBS has become the world's #1 bank in the world. So please give a big round of applause to Piyush. And look at the consistency. It is not just #1 in 1 year, it is for 8 consecutive years, 6 consecutive years.
Thank you, sir. May we now request our chairman, Mr. Atul Tamunekar, to kindly felicitate our guest with a token of appreciation for his time and contribution.
Now, may we request all on stage to join us for a group photograph.
As we conclude today's leadership lecture series, we'd like to express our gratitude for your participation. It has been an enlightening morning with all of you. Before we bid farewell, we kindly request the audience to rise for the national anthems.
Mana Astinayak Jayane Bharat Bhajya Vidhata Punjab Sindh Gujarat Maratha हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल चलति तरंगा तव शुभ नामे गाहे तव शुभ आशीष माहे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे